The local tavern is one of the most iconic locations when it comes to tales of the Middle Ages. Whether it's actual history, your favorite movie, or a game of Dungeons & Dragons, taverns are always an important stop where people can rest, socialize, and of course, share a drink. Chances are, they're one of the first places that pop into your head when you think medieval times. But what were these places actually like in real history? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Historidame, and today, we're discussing what it was like to visit a medieval tavern. Taverns are popular settings in stories for a reason. During the Middle Ages, public drinking houses were social hubs for people of all classes. Places like inns, taverns, and alehouses were important for providing people with a space for recreation, as well as necessary services like offering food and lodging in or around towns and cities. Though these three locations are often treated like the same kind of establishment, however, they all had a distinct purpose and atmosphere. Inns were the most high-end of the three, and had the primary purpose of providing lodging. As trade routes began to expand, a place to spend the night became a necessity for many merchants and travelers along their journeys. Inns could be found situated all throughout Europe, primarily on major roads between settlements and in larger cities. Visitors to an inn could pay for a place in the stable for their horses, as well as rent a room for themselves, though in many cases accommodations were very bare bones. Nicer inns might have provided private rooms for guests, but the smaller ones usually had more than one person sharing the same room. They also served food and drink, but this was only for the people that were staying there, not just anyone who walked in from the street. In many cases, inns were places that could only be afforded by the wealthier members of society, and often catered to traveling merchants or the nobility. Taverns, on the other hand, were a more casual environment, whose primary service was providing a place to drink. These were distinct from other public drinking houses because they primarily sold wine, which was more expensive than most other alcohol at the time. Taverns were either owned and operated by vintners or those who worked for them, which meant that they usually had a monopoly on wine in the communities in which they operated, and could pretty much charge whatever they wanted for it, so long as they met the country's regulations. Some taverns might have also provided rooms for rent or food, but this was more common in the later years of their operation, and would have been much less extensive than something offered at an inn. And finally, we have alehouses, which, like taverns, mainly served as a place for drinking. Unlike taverns, however, these were places for the lower classes, and were affordable for everyone. Alehouses usually operated out of someone's home, and would be run by an alewife who would make and sell the ale. This was primarily a female occupation, and was actually one of the few that was respected during the Middle Ages. Since there was such a low barrier to entry, alehouses were much more numerous than taverns or inns, and could be found in pretty much every small settlement, even the tiniest of villages. Whenever a fresh batch of ale was ready to be sold, the owner would put a sign outside their house that would notify the public. Since most of the general population was illiterate at the time, these signs would include pictures instead of words, often featuring things like brooms or shovels, which would help signify the location as an alehouse. So, what was it like to actually visit a tavern? Well, you could expect it to be quite the lively place. Taverns and alehouses were the social hub in their communities. Yes, these were places to drink, but they were also for socializing and entertainment. Many taverns offered things like music and dancing in addition to refreshments. They were also infamous for being places where one could find some less reputable entertainment, including things like gambling, fighting, and prostitution. While an alehouse usually would have been just a main room in a person's home, larger taverns might have had multiple rooms, including a kitchen, stables, and an extensive wine cellar. You could expect all of these rooms to be dimly lit, since the only light source in the evenings would have come from the fireplace or candles. The main area that served customers would have been lined with long wooden tables and benches, where people could sit and enjoy food, conversation, or drinking. Meals that were served would have been simple fare, usually involving things like bread, cheese, and pottage. Stew was also a common choice, and some taverns would even keep a perpetual stew, where a single pot would serve people over a span of many days, with the cooks adding more broth and ingredients as they took portions away. Guests would eat with either wooden dishes or on a trencher, which was a flat piece of bread that was used in place of a plate. In many cases, they would also have to bring their own knives and spoons, and sometimes even their own cups. If lodging was available, this would have been very minimal, and would usually consist of just a place to sleep on the floor in the kitchens or the stables. But when you walk into a tavern, the first thing that you would have noticed probably wouldn't have been the atmosphere, but rather the smell. With so much going on, the room would have been a mishmash of smoke, food, alcohol, and of course, body odor from all the people crammed inside. Then there would have been the noise, because of course there was music and dancing, but also people get loud when they drink, and sometimes things could get a little bit out of hand. Drinking was an important part of medieval society and culture. Not only was alcohol the main drink that people would have had with their meals, but its consumption was also involved in a lot of social rituals, like weddings, funerals, and religious ceremonies. Since public drinking houses like taverns provided a location for social drinking, they ended up becoming a cornerstone of society. Taverns were places where one could be involved in the latest happenings around their town. They were a hub for meeting friends, making business deals, hearing the latest gossip, and sharing conversation. And when alcohol was mixed with all of these things, it's no wonder that taverns ended up being the location where many angry mobs and peasant uprisings began. Just like bars in our modern age, taverns were no stranger to people getting into fights or having accidents when too much alcohol was involved. Coroner reports from the time list all kinds of deaths and even murders that were a direct result of drunkenness. In the English village of Elstow in 1276, there was a report of one man tripping on his way home after an evening of drinking, and dying when he hit his head on a rock. Other accidents include men falling off their horses, falling into wells, and even one incident where a man was carrying a pot of ale, was bitten by a dog, tripped while trying to pick up a rock to throw at said dog, and then hitting his head on a nearby wall. Now, of course, drinking might have been a normal part of life, but excessive drunkenness that would lead to incidents like these was still highly frowned upon. Gluttony was a sin after all, and the church interpreted this to include not only food but drinking as well. Even still, cracking open a cold one with the boys continued to be a popular pastime that would endure for hundreds of years. So, if you ever wonder what you have in common with a medieval peasant, chances are you both enjoy a good drink. Hey everyone, thank you for watching! If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or a comment down below. If you want to see more content like this, you can also subscribe to my channel, and keep up to date on all the fun history videos of the future. But for now, I bid you farewell.